Good morning, Pre-K. Wilbur and I are happy you're here for Friday. We have a wonderful chapter today called The Miracle. It's not a very long chapter, kind of a short one for a Friday, but it's a goodie, and this will help to kick off the beginning of Charlotte saving Wilbur. If you remember when we stopped yesterday, Charlotte was very busy in her web. She'd torn a bunch of it out and she was reweaving it. And everyone else, they were sleeping, but Charlotte was still at it. So let's find out what she did. She's a very bright spider. The miracle. The next day was foggy. Everything on the farm was dripping wet. The grass looked like a magic carpet. The asparagus patch looked like a silver forest. On foggy mornings, Charlotte's web was truly a thing of beauty. This morning, each thin strand was decorated with dozens of tiny beads of water. The web glistened in the light. It made a pattern of loveliness and mystery. Even Lurvy, who wasn't particularly interested in beauty, noticed the web when he came with the pig's breakfast. He noted how clearly it showed up, and he noted how big and carefully built it was. And then he took another look, and he saw something that made him set his pail down. There, in the center of the web, neatly woven in block letters, was a message. It said, "Some pig." Lurvy felt weak. He brushed his hands across his eyes and stared harder at Charlotte's web. Here we have a little picture. Some pig. Right there in the middle. Charlotte, she's so gifted. "I'm seeing things," he whispered. He dropped to his knees and uttered a short prayer. Then, forgetting all about Wilbur's breakfast, he walked back to the house and called Mr. Zuckerman. "I think you'd better come down to the pig pen," he said. "What's the trouble?" asked Zuckerman. "Anything wrong with the pig?" "No, not exactly," said Lurvy. "Come and see for yourself." The two men walked silently down to Wilbur's yard. Lurvy pointed at the spider's web. "Do you see what I see?" he asked. Zuckerman stared at the writing in the web, and then he murmured the words, "Some pig." Then he looked at Lurvy. Then they both began to tremble. Charlotte, sleepy after her night's work, smiled as she watched. Wilbur came and stood directly under the web. "Some pig," muttered Lurvy in a low voice. "Some pig," whispered Mr. Zuckerman. They stared and they stared for a long time at Wilbur, and then they stared at Charlotte. "You don't suppose that spider," began Mr. Zuckerman. But he shook his head. He didn't even finish the sentence. Instead, he walked solemnly back to the house and spoke to his wife. "Elizabeth, something has happened." He said it in a very weak voice. He went into the living room. He sat down, and Mrs. Zuckerman followed. "I've got something to tell you, Edith," he said. "You'd better sit down." Mrs. Zuckerman sank into her chair. She looked pale and frightened. "Edith," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I think you had best be told we have a very unusual pig." A look of complete bewilderment came over Mrs. Zuckerman's face. "Homer Zuckerman, what in the world are you talking about?" she said. "This is a very serious thing, Edith," he replied. "Our pig is completely out of the ordinary." "What's unusual about that pig?" asked Mrs. Zuckerman, who was beginning to recover from her scare. "Well, I don't really know yet, but we've received a sign, a mysterious sign. A miracle has happened on this farm. There's a large spider's web in the doorway of the barn cellar right over the pig pen. And when Lurvy went to feed the pig this morning, he noticed the web because it was foggy. And you know how a spider's web looks very distinct in the fog? Well, right in the middle of the web were the words, "Some pig." The words were woven right into the web. They were actually part of the web, Edith. I know because I've been down there and I've seen them. It says some pig. Just as clear can be. There can be no mistake about it. A miracle has happened and a sign has occurred right here on earth, right on our farm. We have no ordinary pig. Well, said Mrs. Zuckerman, it seems to me you're a little off. It seems to me we have no ordinary spider. Oh, no, said Zuckerman. It's the pig that's unusual. It says so, right there in the middle of the web. Maybe so, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Just the same, I intend to have a good look at that spider. It's just a common gray spider, said Mr. Zuckerman. They got up and together they walked down to Wilbur's yard. See, Edith, common gray spider. Wilbur was pleased to receive so much attention. Lurvy was standing there, Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman, and all three stood for about an hour reading the words on the web over and over and watching Wilbur. Charlotte was delighted by the way her trick was working. She sat without moving a muscle and listened to the conversation. When a small fly blundered into the web just beyond the word pig, Charlotte dropped quickly down, rolled the fly up, and carried it out of the way. After a while, the fog lifted and the web dried off and the words didn't show up so plainly. The Zuckermans and Lurvy walked back to the house. But just before they left the pig pen, Mr. Zuckerman took one last look at Wilbur. You know, he said in an important voice, I've thought all along that pig of ours was an extra good one. He's a solid pig. A pig as solid as they come. You notice how solid it is around the shoulders, Lurvy? Sure I do, said Lurvy. I always notice that pig. He's quite a pig. He's long and he's smooth, said Zuckerman. That's right, said Lurvy. He's as smooth as they come. He's some pig. When Mr. Zuckerman got back to the house, he took off his work clothes and put on his best suit, and then he got into his car and he drove to his minister's house. He stayed for an hour and explained to the minister that a miracle had happened on the farm. So far, he said, only 4 people on earth know about this. Me, my wife, Edith, my hired man, Lurvy, and you. Don't tell anybody else, said the minister. We don't know what it means yet, but perhaps I'll give some thought to it. There can be no doubt that you have had a most unusual pig. I intend to speak about it in my sermon and point out the fact. This community has been visited by a wondrous animal. By and by, does the pig have a name? Why, yes, said Mr. Zuckerman. My little niece calls him Wilbur. She's a rather odd child, full of notions. She raised the pig on a bottle, and I bought him from her when he was a month old. They shook hands and left. Secrets are hard to keep. Long before Sunday came, the news spread all over the county. Everybody knew that a sign had appeared in the spider's web at Zuckerman's place. Everybody knew that the Zuckermans had a wonderful pig, and people came from miles to look at Wilbur and to read the words on Charlotte's web. And there you can see all the cars, all the people came to look at Wilbur. They came all morning long. The news of the wonderful pig spread into the hills. The farmers came rattling down in buggies and buckboards and all kinds of cars to stand hour after hour at Wilbur's pen, admiring the miraculous animal. They all said they'd never seen such a pig before in their lives. When Fern told her mother that Avery had tried to hit the Zuckerman spider with a stick, Mrs. Arble was so shocked, she sent Avery to bed without any supper. All the days that followed, Mr. Zuckerman was so busy entertaining visitors that he neglected his farm work. He wore his good clothes all the time now, got right into them when he got up in the morning. Mrs. Zuckerman prepared special meals for Wilbur. Lurvy shaved and got a haircut. And his principal farm duty was to feed the pig while people looked on. Mr. Zuckerman ordered Lurvy to increase Wilbur's feedings from 3 meals to 4 meals every day. The Zuckermans were so busy with visitors, they forgot about the other things. The blackberries got ripe, and Mrs. Zuckerman failed to put up any blackberry jam. The corn needed hoeing, and Lurvy didn't have time to hoe it. On Sunday, the church was full. and they talked about the miracle. The minister said the words on the spider's web proved that human beings must always be on the watch for the coming of wonders. All in all, the Zuckerman's pig pen was the center of attraction. Fern was happy, for she felt that Charlotte's trick was working and that Wilbur's life would be saved. But she found that the barn was not nearly as so pleasant. Way too many people. She liked it better when she could be all alone with her friends, the animals. And that is the end of this chapter. The next chapter is called A Meeting. And this is where Charlotte starts to get Templeton pretty involved in this whole scheme. So we'll see what the rat can do. All right. We are on page 86. We have 184 pages. So we're almost halfway through our book. I hope you're enjoying it. And Wilbur hopes you're enjoying it. And have a great weekend. And I'll see you on Monday. Bye.